Every year during the NFL draft process, there are those prospects that kind of start off as being viewed as middle round type of guys that'll go somewhere between rounds 3 to 5. But then once they get into the actual offseason draft process, they see their draft stock soar, at least in the minds of the NFL draft media. Now, maybe it's just the fact that the NFL draft media doesn't do as good of a job vetting prospects as NFL front offices do, and maybe they're starting to catch up on what NFL front offices think of a specific process. Sometimes it's maybe just the fact that the guy was in a situation where he wasn't able to fully showcase his skills. Sometimes it might just be a simple matter of a guy has a type of talent from a physical standpoint that allows him to ace that offseason process, and that always artificially raises guys' draft prospects and raises guys' draft stock no matter what anybody tries to tell you otherwise. And I think one of the guys that clearly fits into this category of a guy that's been a real champion of this whole NFL draft offseason process has been Breshad Perriman from Central Florida. Now, here's a guy that we were talking about a few months ago, probably is more so a 3rd to 4th round pick. And as the process went along, he went from being that to being a 2nd round pick, to an early 2nd round pick, to a late 1st round pick, to now people are talking about him being a lock, stock, and barrel 1st round pick, and maybe even a mid 1st round pick. And this happens every year. It does. It's just part of the beast of the NFL draft process. Now, when I look at Breshad Perriman as a prospect, I understand some of the hype. I get some of the buzz. Here's a guy that's about 6'2.5" or so, maybe 215 pounds, really well put together. Not some type of string bean, but a guy that physically looks the part of a #1 wide receiver at the NFL level. Yeah, he's not 6'5", but he plays bigger than his 6'2.5" frame, and he has the bulk, it seems like, to be able to be physical with the physical corners, be able to beat man press coverage at the NFL level. Here's a guy that we're talking about that can fly. You know when you hear a receiver legitimately runs in the 4.2s and it's pretty much a unanimous time range, somewhere in the 4.2s at his pro day, that is going to shoot up his draft stock no matter what anybody tries to say. Because at the end of the day, speed kills. Speed kills at college, speed kills at the NFL level, and receivers that are 6'2.5", 215 pounds that can run in the 4.2s legitimately don't grow on trees and don't come around every day. You can understand why teams would fall in love with the prospect of a guy with this type of size-speed combination, because these type of guys are rare. And when these guys do come around, you don't want to be the team that passed on the chance to get that guy and then watch him become a star somewhere else where you have to deal with him for the next decade. I'm looking at a Breshad Perriman, too, that comes from a good family tree. He has good football genes. His dad, Brett, who once played for the was a successful NFL wide receiver for several years, most notably with the Detroit Lions. Here's a guy in Breshad Perriman that I also saw on film at times be able to make the spectacular big-time plays that are necessary for a #1 type of NFL wide receiver to make at the NFL level. The type of catches that are required from time to time, the type of catches that a #1 guy, a special type of talent must make. I've seen a guy like Breshad Perriman make these type of catches. I see the potential. And there is a possibility that in 2 or 3 years we will look back and we will see Breshad Perriman as being one of the 2 or 3 best wide receivers to come out of this draft class because of that explosive size, speed, quickness type of combination. But we need to pump our brakes here just a little bit before we just totally fall in love with Breshad Perriman as a prospect, because he needs work, and a lot of it. This guy is a raw physical talent. There is no question in my mind in terms of raw physical talents in this year's draft, in terms of the wide receiver class, he might be the best of them. But he is still a raw physical talent that is far from being a complete college wide receiver, let alone a complete NFL wide receiver. Like for me, when I went and watched UCF film in 2013, obviously I was paying attention to Blake Bortles. But I was also paying attention to Storm Johnson. I was also paying attention to Breshad Perriman. And here was a guy that consistently didn't really jump out at me on film. He didn't really leap out to me. Like in 2011, I was watching Baylor for RG3, and I ended up falling in love with Kendall Wright as a prospect. Kendall Wright actually impressed me more on film than RG3 did. So when a guy like Blake Bortles didn't really impress me coming out of Central Florida, and a Breshad Perriman didn't stand out to me that much and didn't overshine Blake Bortles, to me that's the first kind of warning sign. And now I'm seeing people like Mel Kiper rate him as a top 10 talent in this draft. And I got to say, seriously, people, we need to pump the fucking brakes here. Because there is no way, in my mind, in my opinion, that if you watch the film and you legitimately watch it, legitimately dissect it, that in any way, shape, or form, you could equate Breshad Perriman's readiness right now at the NFL level, or his potential in the NFL level right now, to being a top 5 wide receiver in this class, or a top 10 pick in this freaking draft. That's just ridiculous. That's falling too much in love with the measurables, falling too much in love with the 40 time, and not looking at the football player. The first thing I don't like about Breshad Perriman's game is the fact that I've known he's fast, I know he's explosive, but it doesn't always show up on film. What good does it do for a guy to run a 4.25 40 in shorts and a t-shirt if that speed doesn't always translate on film? And that speed, I assure you, that athleticism doesn't always translate on film when you go back and watch Perriman over the past 2 years. Just because he can run fast doesn't always mean he plays up to that speed, doesn't mean he always plays that fast. Like on the flip side of that, a perfect example would be a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, a guy who was never going to time fast on the 40, but played faster than his 40 time. A guy like Jerry Rice also stands out. There are guys that play with a different type of speed. It's called football speed. And when I look at Breshad Perriman's football speed, I don't see where it measures up to his athletic abilities. And that concerns me a little bit because now you're drafting him more off of track speed than maybe you are actual functional playing football speed. Here's a guy that I think is very inconsistent in his route running at times. He showed me the ability to demonstrate an advanced route running tree that's going to be required of him if he wants to be a number 1 wide receiver at the NFL level. But there were other times that I thought his routes were very lacking and rounded off routes. He wasn't as explosive in and out of breaks as a guy you would think would be being able to run a 4.25 40 in t-shirt and shorts. You know, here's a guy that, yes, he did make spectacular plays. I'll grant you that. But he dropped a lot of balls. The biggest, most important thing a number 1 wide receiver at the NFL level could do, or even a starting wide receiver at the NFL level could do to be viewed as a consistent weapon and a consistent force and a reliable target, is to be able to catch the damn ball. And Breshad Perriman dropped a lot of balls and a lot of easy balls at Central Florida, especially in 2014. The fact that people are talking about him as a top 10 prospect, and even frankly a first-round prospect, is absolutely mind-blowing to me. We can fall in love with the speed all we want, but Darius Hayward-Bay was fast. Troy Williamson was fast. At the end of the day, what the fuck does that speed mean if that speed, 1, doesn't translate to their game, and 2, they're not good route runners and they can't catch the fucking football? What good does it do for a guy to make the spectacular catches if he can't make the solid, consistent, reliable catches that you need a guy to make? You're not just going to be able to always coast by on the spectacular plays. You have to be able to make the solid and consistent ones as well. And just because his dad was an NFL wide receiver doesn't necessarily in any ways indicate that he himself is going to be a good or very good NFL wide receiver. I mean, if we use that logic, we would have sat there and said Jarrett Payton would have been a Pro Bowl running back at the NFL level because his dad was arguably the greatest football player of all time and the most well-rounded running back in NFL history. Just because his dad was this doesn't mean that Jarrett was going to be this. Jarrett was a good college player, a guy that was a borderline NFL player. I mean, so let's not just fall in love with him because his dad was this. That was his dad. Yeah, the genes are there, but what does that necessarily mean? Doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot necessarily. And then we have to look at level of competition too. Playing at Central Florida, he didn't face the stiffest competition in the world. And when you look at the numbers, yeah, he had a huge number in terms of yards per catch, but he didn't have a ton of receptions. You could blame that on the system. You could blame that on Blake Bortles being gone. But did he really improve that much from 2013 to 2014? Look, if I'm an NFL front office, I'm looking at a guy like Breshad Perriman, and I'm hoping he could turn into somebody like a Roddy White. I see some of that talent there, and I see that type of potential. And in terms of a prospect, he reminds me somewhat of Roddy White coming out of UAB in 2006, a guy who at one point in time, if I remember correctly, Mel Kiper had rated as the 7th overall prospect on his board before later dropping him. However, I liked Roddy White a lot more coming out of UAB than I do Breshad Perriman coming out of Central Florida, especially in this really good wide receiver class. There are other wide receivers with size and speed in this draft. There are other wide receivers with better hands. To me, Breshad Perriman is more of a 9th or 10th rated wide receiver in this year's draft class than a 9th or 10th overall rated prospect. Again, in 2 or 3 years, I could end up eating my words because he could get into the right system with the right coaching, he could have the right talent around him, and he could really shine because of his athleticism. But what I see right now suggests to me that there is huge bust potential on taking a Breshad Perriman in the middle of round 1 because of what I see on film. His speed and athleticism that he demonstrates in shorts and a t-shirt don't translate to the football field and football pads. He's inconsistent in his route running, and he has terrible hands. Are these things that are fixable? Yes. Are these things that are coachable? Yes. Does that guarantee that they're going to get fixed? No. Does that mean somebody's going to be able to coach him up and get him to be better? No. If you want to take a second-round gamble on a guy like Breshad Perriman, I understand. Even a late first-round gamble on a Breshad Perriman, I understand. But this middle of the first-round talk, being rated as top 10 or top 15 prospect in this draft class, isn't the greatest, but it's not that goddamn weak. There is no freaking way. To me, Breshad Perriman is a second to third-round talent, and I'll stand behind that because of what I've seen on film.